A very good evening to all our viewers. Hope all of you and your family members are safe and healthy. Welcome to yet another session on Master Speak. By now, we have run over 40 sessions in the last 6 months, and each of the sessions, must I say, is a gem. It's been a pleasure to bring you face to face with some of the most important and most prominent luminaries from diverse backgrounds on this platform in order to help you navigate the ongoing crisis better and emerge stronger. You can find the recordings of all these sessions on our website or social channels. Do browse and watch at leisure. Now, tell us which city or town you are logged in from. It's always interesting to know the spread of the geography of our audiences on these sessions. Tag your colleagues, friends, and anyone you wish to join us for the session. It's always fun to learn together. And as always, don't forget to post your questions and comments in the comment box. Remember, the 2 lucky questions will be rewarded with the Amazon gift vouchers. But for that, you have to stay with us till the end of the session. So keep your questions coming, stay tuned, and hold on for the end of the session to know who the 2 winners are. Now, today we have a very important topic to talk about. It's about leadership and role leaders play in helping organizations become great at what they do, regardless of circumstances. I am happy to introduce our master speakers for today, and we have 2 master speakers today. This is the first time that's happening on the show. So we have Jennifer Garvey Berger, who has coached leaders at Harvard University, the University of Sydney, and Oxford Brookes University. Jennifer is the CEO of Cultivating Leadership, where she serves senior leaders from Silicon Valley to the wilds of New Zealand, from the financial sector in China to the climate change ecosystems in Europe. That's really fascinating. I mean, I love the job profile, Jennifer, that you've got here. Joining Jennifer, we have Zafar, who's an executive coach, a team coach, designer, and a facilitator of leadership development interventions. Now, he embraces a developmental approach aimed at increasing his clients' inner complexity to match the outer complexity of their challenges. Before joining Cultivating Leadership, Zafar spent 34 years with McKinsey and Company. It's my pleasure to have both of you joining us today, Jennifer and Zafar. And we are all ears to listen to you. Our audience are all there waiting to listen to what you have to tell us today. Thank you very much for joining in, and welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for having us. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you, Rakesh.
Pleasure is all ours.
So today we're gonna talk about this idea of leadership mind traps. And here's the question we were struggling with as we began to come up with this concept. Basically, we had been teaching for many years what leaders should do when they're faced with a lot of complexity, ambiguity, and change, very much like now. And as we taught leaders, we found that leaders all over the world in all industries were getting better and better at handling complexity, and still there were 1 or 2 small traps they would fall into. And as we paid attention to these little traps they were falling into, we saw they were actually the same across industry around the world. We began to wonder, what is this? And how can we escape from these traps? And over time, we've researched and found these 5 traps that we're going to tell you about that are naturally ingrained in us as we have evolved as humans for a simpler world. And so as we go through, I'd love you to consider just a complex challenge that faces you at home or at work, which in the time of COVID, I think we all can find complex challenges all around us. And just take one and see which one of these traps might be the trappiest one for you right now. So shall we begin? Zafar, are you ready?
All set.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So here's the first idea. The first idea is that humans love to believe that we're right. It's been one of social science's great mysteries, is how is it that humans tend to believe we are right about most things most of the time, even about things that we could not possibly be right about because nobody could ever be right about them. And yet, in experiment after experiment, we've found that humans feel like we're right most of the time. And as researchers have been trying to figure this out, they've discovered that this is both incredibly adaptive and also somewhat problematic, right? It's adaptive because when we feel like we're right, we can leap into action quite cleanly, quite quickly. And in much of human history, leaping into action, recognizing a pattern very fast and moving quickly to deal with that pattern has been really important to our survival. And it's also been true that a thing that we were right about yesterday will probably be right about tomorrow. The berry that was poisonous last week is going to be poisonous next week. The the predator that's after us last week is going to be dangerous next week. And so this idea that we were constantly dealing with a landscape that was full of threats, but full of threats that were pretty predictable, has kept us feeling like, oh, I know what to do right now. And we as humans experience this as I've made a decision, I've thought it through really well. But actually, in a brain scan, it turns out that certainty is an emotion, not the result of a carefully thought through process, right? It occurs to us that we thought something through and then we were certain. But in a brain scan, we can see that we were certain and then we backfilled what we thought about it so that we had evidence to prove us right. This is obviously not helpful in a world where there's so much uncertainty, where there's so much complexity, and where we don't know what tomorrow might hold. In this world, we need to be learning, and certainty is the enemy of learning. It's the enemy of curiosity. And so, how do we escape this rightness? We escape this rightness. I think there are two really handy questions we can carry with us. The first question is, what do I believe? How can we even shift thinking, oh, I know this, to thinking, I believe this? So if we begin to ask ourselves, what do I believe? Instead of what do I know, then we remember that there's just a little bit of difference between our sense of certainty and actually being right about something. And the second question is, how could I be wrong? This question turns out to be incredibly helpful for people to carry with them because it opens us up to looking for alternatives. When we believe we are right, we block our vision to other possibilities. When we ask, how could I be wrong? Our vision opens. This is the first mind trap.
And the second mind trap is a cousin of rightness. We call it the mind trap of simple stories. As humans, we are wired for stories, for storytelling. As early as we know, we sat around fires and we told each other stories. Our memory for stories is much more vivid, much more durable, much more active than our memory for logical arguments or for facts. We are more easily persuaded by stories, and they travel faster between us. They travel faster between humans. And so storytelling has helped us over the history of humankind to build communities, to shape religions, to shape shared common beliefs, cultural beliefs, civilizations. So our being wired for stories is extremely important and pivotal in the history of humans. And in those stories, we have created sort of a template that includes the present linking into the past and into the future, where something happening in the past creates the present conditions, and the present conditions create the future. We have created the idea that there are heroes, usually ourselves, and villains, usually others in the stories. And the stories have this almost mechanical quality to them, where they lead to a particular outcome, a good outcome or a bad outcome. Now, this particular template, this particular default script that we hold is not particularly helpful when things become complex, when things become ambiguous, when things become uncertain. To me, it comes to life, for example, when I'm driving and a driver just impolitely cuts ahead of me in a line. And I always imagine that this is, the highest form of human misbehavior. But it also happens to me, for example, if I suddenly receive a call from my boss and I wasn't expecting it, and I assume that the worst is going to happen, that I'm going to be fired or I'm going to be let go of. To escape the mind trap of simple stories, and I'm going to use those two examples to introduce the escape routes, there are two things that we recommend, that we suggest you think of. The first is, imagine that the other person, that driver that is the worst kind of human being as you depicted them in your story, imagine that they were a hero in their story. Imagine for a second that that driver is actually rushing to the hospital because their kid just had an accident. And in the story of your boss, create 2 or 3 possible stories that don't involve you being fired. For example, it might be you being promoted, or it might be you being invited to take part in some party for a work colleague, or whatever. But have a little repertoire of 2 or 3 stories that help you not be caught in a single one.
So now we have 2 mind traps. Here's the third. So humans love to agree with each other. It turns out if you sit down with a new person that you've never met before and you have a cup of tea together, over the cup of tea, as each of you stumble on different conversational patterns, every time you agree about something, both of you get a hit of dopamine, a pleasure hormone. It actually feels delightful to agree with each other. And this is because we are wired to be tribal. We needed each other, and we needed to know who's in my tribe and who's out of my tribe. And our bodies are constantly trying to help us understand, oh, you are in my tribe. Oh, you are not in my tribe. And to get us to be in these like tight knit groups, our bodies have also sort of begun to punish us when we step out of line. So just as it feels delightful to find things we agree about, it also literally hurts us when we feel that we are at some risk for social pain. So in a brain scan, you cannot tell the difference between someone who's feeling social pain, someone who's feeling the pain of being not invited to do something, the pain of feeling like her friends don't like her, the pain of feeling like she's been left out, and physical pain, the pain of breaking your ankle or hurting yourself in some way. In a brain scan, these two things are the same. It literally hurts us to be socially outcast. And so because of this, we are constantly working to figure out how can we be in with our group. And similarly, we are amplifying the differences between our group and somebody else. Now, in a simpler world where those in our tribe were important to keeping us alive and those in the next tribe might be threatening to us, this is probably a very helpful set of conditions. It helped us build larger and larger communities together and to go along with particular cultures. It's the foundation of what it is to be in human community. Now, though, in such a complex world where we so require diversity and difference of opinion to broaden our view well enough to get along with each other in this global space, now this habit that our minds and our bodies have is really unhelpful. And we get really trapped by this sense that we agree. So what do we do about it? So the first thing we do is we have to literally create spaces to welcome disagreement, conflict, outliers, particularly if you're a leader of any kind, whether it's the leader of a family, a leader of a small organization, or the leader of a massive organization, we need to each be figuring out, how do we stretch to welcome in those who disagree with us? Because as you see from the first two traps, we're going to narrow and narrow our focus to include just what we think it should be. And in complexity, we want more and more possibilities, not fewer and fewer possibilities. So we need to create ways of engaging. We need to remember to ask who has a different opinion. We need to remember to welcome somebody. Argue with me against this. I feel too certain about this. You help me understand a different way. And we need to let people know that they still belong even through their difference. In fact, they belong because of their difference. And in this way, we're learning how to disagree to expand our possibilities. We can even say this in a meeting. I'd like to disagree with you here, not because I don't like where you're headed, but because I think there are multiple ways to head. In complexity, we want multiple pathways because any one pathway might take us to the wrong place. This is the third mind trap.
And I get to tell you about the next mind trap, the mind trap of control, which is my favorite and also my trappiest. So imagine that I ask you the question of, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is, I'm really easy, and 5 is, I'm a control freak, where do you think you are? I know that for myself and for many of the people that I've asked that question to, we are subject to pretty high levels of needing to control things, pretty high levels. And as humans throughout history, our urge, our impulse to control has really helped us achieve remarkable things. It's that urge that helped us first create tools, then build shelters, tame animals, and ultimately in the 20th century and beyond, build trains, and even build the internet on which we are communicating today. All of these are direct results of our urge to control things, to shape things. We are biologically programmed to seek and relish pretty high degrees of control. Actually, research shows that people who feel in control of their lives live longer, healthier, and happier lives. So it is deeply embedded in our biology. But in complexity, by definition, we cannot control things. By definition, we cannot predict things. And when we try in complexity, the world backfires at us. For example, in a team that wanted to increase psychological safety, the sort of sensible step of saying, okay, we're going to allow people to call each other out if anyone makes a move that is psychologically unsafe. Well, that sounds like a reasonable idea, except human dynamics are such that the process of calling people out starts creating psychological safety. It starts creating psychological unsafety. Or in call centers, when we ask, when we commit to reducing wait times, we unexpectedly and unwittingly encourage operators to sometimes close too fast a conversation with a client. And actually, we end up with customers that are less satisfied after we've reduced wait times than they were before we reduced them. And so in complexity, what we get when we try to control things are cultures of blame, helplessness, and cultures of firefighters. Because if I believe that I control things, and if things don't go my way, then there must be someone else who has gotten them to go the other way. And therefore, there is someone to blame. And if there's someone to blame, I'm helpless. There's not much that I can do myself. So what do we do about this? I think in complexity, it really helps to think of ourselves not as engineers who make things happen, but as gardeners who create conditions for good things to happen. Like a gardener tends a garden and create conditions for flowers and plants, etc., to blossom and weeds not to blossom. So think of yourselves as a gardener creating the right conditions. And the second thing is, instead of acting with the desire to shape outcomes, act in multiple ways to experiment with the reality around you and to learn from it, so that your next round of actions is even better informed and nudges things in even more favorably than the first round. So that was the fourth and next to last mindset, mind trap.
Okay, so here's the fifth one, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So keep your questions coming. And we've started to believe that this fifth one is kind of like a master trap, because it's in many ways, it's the thing that holds us in place in the other traps. And let me tell you a little bit about it. We are trapped by our own egos. And here I'm going to define ego as the way we are constantly producing ourselves for the approval, the understanding of others and ourselves. So I'm constantly showing you a version of me, and I've got some energy wrapped up in showing you this version of me instead of that version of me. And you're doing this all the time too. It's just the way humans act. It can't be helped. And for generations, this has helped us kind of decide, who am I being, and let us show up in that way with others. And in a fairly simple world, we could stay as this sort of person we are, the person we have been for decades. Now, though, the world asks us to change. The world asks us to be a work in progress, always trying to figure out, where have we come from and who might we become, right? And in this place, the fact that we kind of believe that we have kind of arrived in who we are today and who we will be, this becomes a trap. In fact, researchers have asked people at every step along the way, how much have you changed in the last decade? I'd like you to just consider that. How much have you changed in the last decade? People tend to say, I've changed a lot in the last decade. You ask a 20-year-old, how much have you changed in the last decade? And the 20-year-old says, from 10 to 20, I've changed enormously. And then you ask, how much will you change in the next decade? And the 20-year-old says, oh, from 20 to 30, not that much. But the 30-year-old says, I've changed enormously from 20 to 30. From 30 to 40, not that much. And again, all through the lifespan, we think we've changed a lot to get to here, but we're not going to change that much to get to there. And because of that, we get particularly attached to and trapped in this person we are being right now. So if you think of the qualities or the characteristics that are most dear to you about yourself, and one way to imagine this is, if, say, you walked into a room, people were talking about you behind your back, and they were saying the most delightful things about you, what would those things be? You could have a little think about, like, maybe they would be saying you were fast or smart or reliable. And these are great things. For me, I like it when people say, oh, she's open, she's approachable, right? She's curious. I love these things. But even as these descriptors have been super helpful to us in who we are becoming, even these beautiful words can become a trap over time, because suddenly, for you to be showing yourself as, say, competent all the time, that means you can't be so curious about things. Or for showing yourself to be quick, it might mean that when you need to slow down and take a breath, you can't do that because you're so invested in showing yourself to be quick. So for each of us, there's a way that the person we are today is fantastic, has gotten us to right here, and might stay in the way of the person we could be next. So how do we get out of this particular trap? By carrying this question, who would I like to be next? Not what would I like to be next, not what do I want to do next. We tend to be very, very good at imagining an achievement or a place or a thing. I'm talking about carrying the question, who will I be? Will I be more generous? Will I be more clear-minded? Will I be more curious? Imagining who might you be is a really helpful way to kind of call that future self into the present, to call yourself to release hold a little bit on who you've been. And very often, who we've been is influenced by these mind traps. Have we been really sure of ourselves? Have we loved the sense of being in control? Have we loved knowing that our stories are the right ones? And if we loved getting along with people, knowing who our tribe was, each of these mind traps not only traps us in the moment of complexity, but it also creates a kind of web to hold us where we are. And to get out of that, imagining the changes that we've been through already. How much have you changed since you were little? How much have you changed going through your life? Who have you become along the way? And then imagining a map of development. There are lots of maps of development out there. Adult development, how do we grow and change over time? Imagining those maps is just incredibly helpful in letting ourselves be more relaxed, more open, more agile, and crafting, creating, allowing the person we could be next to come into being. So those are the 5, right? We have simple stories, rightness, agreement, control, and ego. Each of these 5 has been incredibly helpful to us over the course of our history as humans. And each of the 5 gets in the way as we are navigating a less predictable, more complex, more multidimensional, interconnected world that humans have ever seen before. And if you pick just the one that seems to be most trappy for you today, and you carry these little questions or these little keys to unlock them, you'll find yourself living in a bigger world with more possibilities. This is our hope. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to take on some questions from you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer and Zafar, for a very interesting, insightful session. This is the first time we've had 2 speakers, and I just love the way how nicely you sort of managed the whole conversation between the 2 of you on these 5 mind traps for leaders. So something that I mean, we've been exposed to it in different words, but the way you've narrated it sort of resonates very well, and I'm sure our audience have absolutely enjoyed the session. Going by the questions that I have already, there are quite a few. But before I come to the questions by the audience, Jennifer and Zafar, and either of you can decide to answer the questions. Honestly, so I will leave it to either one of you to decide who has to answer the questions. But I think the simplest question that I have, I mostly ask all the global leaders who have been on show so far, that everybody has their own take of who should be, what a leader should look like, and what is leadership all about. So I will just start by asking that very simple question: what, according to you, is leadership, and who is a leader?
Shall I start, and then Zafar, you can pop in? So it's a great question. For me, a leadership is someone who makes new future possibilities emerge, right? Or who creates, as Zafar said, the garden for these possibilities. I believe that you know that you're a leader when other people around you are their biggest and best selves, that you're leading not only an idea, but also another human into being closer to their own edge of possibility than they are without you. So for me, this is a key facet of leadership. How about you, Zafar?
I would add that the best leaders I've seen are learners, and they learn in public, and they are not afraid of letting others see that they're not perfect, that they still have a lot to grow into.
Very interesting. In fact, that reminds me of our earlier session with Tom Peters, and he's a big believer in people and leaders for people. He had similar views that he had shared with us. Zafar, I'm going to just a very interesting point, and I saw a question from one of our audience. I'll just quickly browse through the question. Yes. So so this is from Simran, Zafar, and it sort of relates to what you just mentioned. Now, it's been seen that a lot of leaders have been successful because they've also been strong-headed in some way, right? So they have a mind of their own. Now, and because they've been successful doing things that they've been doing and how they've been doing things, uh, in a way, they must be feeling safe about doing things going forward as well in the way they've been comfortable with. So, how would you then recommend that they should cross over their own egos and encourage differences and outliers? But possibly this is not the way they have become successful.
Rakesh, I didn't hear 100% of the question or understand it 100%. I wondered, Jennifer, if you want to take the first pass and I will build.
Sure, I'm happy to. So this is you're describing, Rakesh, like the most classic leadership trap. I think this is like the ego trap at large, which is the thing that got us to this place, and the things that we were great at that got us here don't tend to be the same things that get us to the next place. And so very often leaders make their way in the world by being certain, by being right, by being, as you say, strong-minded, or charging ahead. And this is often helpful for them early in their career when there are simpler challenges to deal with, and becomes less and less helpful. In fact, one of the things Zafar and I and our colleagues often coach leaders with is leaders who have a challenge getting out of those habits. So you say, how do we get out of them? First, we recognize them. Like the first thing about all these traps is you recognize that they're traps. You recognize that they're helpful sometimes, and there are sometimes they're not helpful, and then you understand the difference. So this is the first thing. The second thing is, I think it's really helpful to let people know that you're growing. Let people know that you're on a growth journey so that they can help you. I think, as Zafar was just saying, the best leaders learn in public. I think the best leaders also let their colleagues understand, I am a work in progress. I am becoming something else, and I would like your help. And so this allowing people to say, yeah, I feel like I've been a little too certain for the conditions, and I would like your support in noticing that and asking this question, how could I be wrong? This is like a little sliver of vulnerability that tends to deepen human relationships and deepen people's admirations of the leaders that they're following. Zafar, what would you add?
Thank you. Now I understand the question better. The one thing that I would add is this possible misunderstanding or misconstruing of authenticity that can get in the way at times. I sort of think of authenticity. An authentic leader is a leader that, in this moment, behaves in a way that is congruent with their feeling and their thinking in this moment. But sometimes authenticity is understood as an authentic leader is a leader that will live by the values that they have held since they were a teenager or since they were a young adult, and they will never, ever change. that concept of authenticity is not very helpful because it precludes evolving and adapting to new circumstances. And so I encourage, wherever we encounter this concept in organizations, to define it as an in the moment thing, so that we allow growth to happen before the moment and after the moment.
Fair enough. That's well understood, Jennifer and Zafir. But another question from Raneet is that how do leaders actually identify that they are getting into these mind traps? So, is there a mental model or process that you would advise to leaders to recognize that they have these mental traps, and therefore, if they recognize, they can do something about it?
Yeah, this is another place where learning is a kind of community sport. So I love the idea of sharing this quick framework with your team and letting the team know, sharing it with your team, with your partner. It's a little bit dangerous to share it with your kids, but I have done this and it's not always disastrous. But sharing it with those who are around you, letting them know this is what I'm working on, because it's almost always easier for somebody else to recognize that we're in a trap faster than we recognize it. So if we share and we let people say, hey, could you let me know when you see me falling into this trap? This is one helpful way. The other thing I want to say is people will often feel distressed because they'll realize, oh, yesterday I fell into this mind trap and now I feel really bad because I fell into it yesterday and I feel like I just can't change because I keep falling into it. Actually, noticing that you did something yesterday is the first step of change. So noticing that it happened yesterday opens us up to understanding maybe that it happened an hour ago. And if we focus on that, then maybe it happened 10 minutes ago. And we just want to bring that closer and closer into this present time. But we want to celebrate every time we've noticed that we've fallen into one of these traps, because that is the first step to getting out. What do you think, Zafar?
I have nothing to add. That was beautiful. Thank you.
And I would agree. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for summarizing that so nicely. Mohit wants to do the next question is what advice would you have for the leaders in these difficult times and stressful times when your minds are so preoccupied with the crisis which is surrounding us, right? So you're, in a way, your prefrontal cortex, as they call it, is always in action. So you are in that survival mode. And it's important then to take control of the situation. Whereas you mentioned one of the mind traps is about being in control. So is this really bad situation to be in, being in control?
Sorry, I'm going to start with this one because luckily I heard the full question, Rakesh, which was brilliant. I don't know what's happening on the internet lines between Beirut and India, but there's something that is not as smooth as between India and the UK. Anyway, so precisely when we are facing crisis under crisis and pressure point after pressure point, our bodies get invaded by hormonal response that floods us with cortisol. And cortisol is the stress hormone, as we know, and it gets us, it narrows our vision, it makes us much less capable of engaging in relationships, and it makes us much more wanting to act, to take action. It's actually our muscles, the big muscles in our bodies, are activated by the rush of adrenaline and cortisol. And so it's no wonder that the more stressed we are, the more we want to be in control, the more we feel that we need to take action, the less we listen to others, and the more we believe in our own rightness. So actually, and paradoxically, our advice to leaders in these particular times, the most turbulent times that we've ever known, is to find even more space and be more deliberate about creating space for restoration, creating space for deactivating the sympathetic nervous system cortisol response and activating the parasympathetic nervous system dopamine, oxytocin response in our bodies so that we calm down, ease, and start seeing things in broader, more spacious ways, start being able to listen better and see more options. It's not easy to find restorative space when we're all working from home and often in cramped circumstances with many people around us. But there are ways of doing it, and we can talk about those if the question comes. Jennifer, what would you say?
I guess I would just add to that that having our nervous systems get hijacked by complexity is natural, and right now is very problematic. As you say, it not only gets in the way of these short-term, like how do I listen right now? It's also just very bad for our bodies generally. It's very bad for our long-term health impacts. And one of the great ironies of right now is that complexity is one of the things that causes the most strong stress response in the body. And that strong stress response actually degrades our immune system. So the more we get stressed out about a pandemic and the more anxious we are about that, the less able our systems are to fight off illness. So taking these restorative moves and even these micro restorative moves of using the breath to center and ground, just to switch our nervous system back into an alignment. This, I think, is not only leadership saving, but is also life saving right now.
And I would just add to that, yoga and meditation can be extremely powerful to gain control over yourself in these situations.
These are among the most powerful tools we have to adjust our immune systems, to adjust our nervous systems. And whether we can practice for a half an hour a day or 3 minutes in between meetings, these practices are, I think, more and more mandatory for thriving in this world that we find ourselves in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. Zafar, big shout out to our audience. Keep your questions coming. We've got about another 10 to 12 minutes in the show. So you could still get a chance to be one of the 2 lucky winners. Okay, the next one is from Sarang. And this relates to the mind trap of agreement that you spoke of. So you mentioned that leaders need to invite differences and listen to outliers. So Salan wants to know, how can companies establish a culture of idea generation or innovation? So a lot of companies put out this statement with all the good intent. They create these idea teams, idea labs, but that's not really something that builds a culture. So is there a, in the way that you articulated, Jennifer and Zafar, how should company build a culture of innovation and creativity in the organization?
Zafar, you want to start or you want me to start? Okay, I'll start. So I think this is a great question. And of course, in the next few minutes, we're not going to be able to solve all the challenges of the world, but creating little habits at the beginning of team meetings, for example, small rituals can be incredibly helpful in fostering the spirit of innovation. One of the things we always do at the beginning of a meeting, and we teach the leaders around us to do, the leaders we work with, is what we call a complexity check-in. So a complexity check-in is where you begin the meeting with a single question, everybody answers the question, And then you take a second loop of that question and you say, what do we notice about how we answered the question? So it's the second loop. Maybe we've all answered a question like, what was the most surprising thing we heard from a customer this week? We all answer that question. And then we go around and we notice, what do we notice about this? What are the patterns we noticed is one of the questions we ask ourselves of the little collection of those of us who are speaking. Patterns are easy for the human brain to notice. We do this automatically. But the second question we always ask are, what are the outliers? One of the things we find is that we tend to, when we look across a group, we tend to smooth out the outliers. We ignore them. We even sometimes just forget they even happened. And particularly if we're trying to create companies or spaces of innovation, we want to welcome in outlying opinions because it's there on the edges that these fantastic opinions often are. And so having the group look at, welcome outliers is super important. And then the last question we tend to ask is, what wasn't said? What were the silences? What were the empty spaces? This is the thing the human brain does worst. We have a cognitive bias that says if we didn't hear about it, then it probably doesn't exist. This is problematic. So getting a team to begin to look at outliers and also these absences, what wasn't said, begins to build a culture that welcomes diversity and that hunts for those spaces that are uncommon, the spaces that are less talked about, less known, less speakable sometimes. And even this very small move at the beginning of a meeting, which might take, it could take 6 minutes, it could take an hour, depending on the sort of question you ask. This begins to build a culture that welcomes innovation, that makes space for things that might not have been obvious. And as more and more leaders do it more and more of the time, groups begin to think together more agilely. So we recommend these in like other habits. Zafar, what would you say?
I would add that one of the biggest impediments to cultures of innovation is the fear of failure, the fear of the consequences of making a mistake or of failing. So one of the things that we often do is help organizations make peace with the idea that failure is a good thing, that failure is actually rich in learning. So for example, we can take the process that Jennifer described, the check-in process she described, and turbocharge it and ask a question, started with a question not about surprise, for example, but about failure. For example, ask every executive around the room, tell us about something that you feel that you are not succeeding at or failing at, and that you have not yet made sense of. Not the kind of failure where you emerge as a hero at the end because you solve it, but the kind of genuine failure in which you have both of your feet immersed today. And let's talk about it. Let's see what we can learn.
Superb. I have two very interesting questions which I'm going to combine for you guys. I find them to be a little provocative. Let's see how what you have to say about this. So this is about the job of being a leader is very tough. And this is an anonymous question, and the other one is Rima. So I'm just being conscious of calling out names. Yeah. So job of leadership is a tough job, and they must balance the need to deliver their quarterly results and also make decisions about people and make sure that the business continues to operate in a very strong way, especially in times like these, as we spoke of earlier. Isn't being popular or being likable by people a mind trap that leaders should avoid? And how should they go about making decisions which may make them unpopular with their people, and they may be construed as not being good leaders if they take those decisions?
You want to start us off, Zafar?
No, go, Jennifer. I'll follow. It's working well this way, so.
So, yeah, leadership is necessarily about carving a path that maybe others wouldn't carve. And some of the decisions people need to make are difficult and will surely help you be unpopular with some folks, right? One of the one of the consistent challenges we help leaders with in our work as coaches is how they understand when they are making a decision for the right reasons and when they are making decisions because they want to be popular or liked, when they are kind of caught up by this concern. And at the same time, leaders are trying to help bring people along, and there is so much in our capacity for conversation, for letting people know about our thinking, how we began to think this way, and deeply inquiring into the thinking of other people, that even if we continue to disagree with each other, or even if I make an unpopular move, that move is more understandable. And the thing that we're going for as leaders, I think, is to create the conditions for us to have a shared sense of why we are making the decisions we're making. Because what humans respond worst to is something that strikes them as unfair, out of the blue, unexpected. This is what we react most to. And many leaders make these kinds of decisions because they don't like the idea of having hard conversations. And so they put off the hard conversations for such a long time that then there's nowhere to go but to have the hardest conversation. So creating a different level of conversations and creating a different level of listening together along the way means even when we take hard decisions, relationships tend to not suffer so much.
The one thing I would add, Jennifer, is that the mind trap of control, our fear of losing control, makes us as leaders hesitant to share our thinking with others because we're afraid that others are going to push back and are going to invite us to change and consider other options, etc. So that fear of losing control of the decision-making process makes us hoard it and keep it away from others. And by keeping it away from others, we trigger the sense that Jennifer is talking about, lack of fairness, lack of respect, lack of being heard, etc., which amplifies the response that others have to our leadership acts. So it takes courage to let go of that need to control the decision making, open it up, and then unpopular decisions will be much less unpopular, even if they're tough.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer and Zafar. The next one is from Simple Juneja. And Simple wants to know that is there an organizational model of cultivating leadership? And would you have any advice for young managers who are looking at whose ambitions have to become leaders at some point in time in their career as to how should they go about realizing that ambition of being a true leader?
It's a great question too. This how do I find myself in a place where I can grow is basically this question I'm hearing. Um, and I think that we need to learn to actually find conditions for ourselves where that becomes possible. If we have as one of the things we're looking for as we enter a new position, join a new team, if we have the question, not just what is my career advancement potential, because this is often the question people carry, like what's my salary, what are my duties, and what's my career advancement potential. These kind of shape our thinking. And are the people nice? There's this missing question that people don't often ask, which is how will I grow as a person here? Because to grow as a leader is to grow as a person. This is who we are develops, right? Not just our skills. And this is often shown by some of the things we've been talking about so far. Are the other leaders around you leading in public? Learning in public? Do you have a sense of them as growing, changing individuals? I would so much rather work for somebody who says, geez, I'm working on these two things and it's hard, as opposed to somebody who's trying to look like perfect and buttoned up all the time. An organization with a culture of perfectionism, a culture of keep your problems to yourself, a culture of put on your game face when you come to work. This is an organization where you are not going to be able to grow very much. They're giving you a signal that says, we only want a sliver of your humanity here. And actually, places that will be actually able to handle the complexity of the time will invite people's whole humanity into work. Their growing selves, their trailing selves, their annoyed selves, their shadowy selves, their brilliant selves, their questioning selves. All of us are required in this moment to be able to be agile enough to handle the unbelievable challenges leaders across industries are facing.
The one thing I would add or I would qualify Jennifer's answer by saying that even in organizations where on average and at scale, you get a leadership approach that feels old-fashioned and closed, etc., if as a young person you get recruited and invited on a team that is headed by someone at a junior level who looks to you to be a learner, looks to you to be a potential mentor, etc., by all means, jump on the opportunity. Even the most stultified organizations have pockets in them where you can learn and grow. And all of the research that we know says that the most important factor in one's happiness and growth within a workplace is actually their immediate boss. It's not the culture of the place up there, it is really their immediate boss. So don't let go of the low-hanging fruits if you find them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Zafar. But before I finally thank you, these were the 10 questions for the segment today. I will take one more as an exception and then formally thank you for being on this show. So we have a lot of our audience is who's watching us today, also students, management students, essentially, and they're aspiring to be sort of starting their career and doing great things in their career. Last piece of advice from both of you to all these budding youngsters, what skills they should be focusing on today to be able to become leaders for tomorrow?
I'm going to share my screen one last time in the spirit of sharing some resources and answering your question. Here we go. So here's what I'd say. I'd say the most important thing to learn right now is how to continually learn. Because whatever you're in school preparing for is not going to be what you're going to be doing in 10 years. What you're going to be doing in 10 years doesn't exist now, except for the way we are being, the way we are leading, the way we are able to have conversations, the way we are able to listen in new ways. These are going to be the things that stick with us across our careers. And so we have on our website a ton of videos, blogs, ideas, as we're always trying to figure out the answer to questions like this. So I'd encourage you to come along, check it out, and keep learning with us, because I think it's the keeping learning that's the thing that matters so much right now.
Yeah, there is nothing that I would want to add to that, including in old age, learning not to stop your camera when you want to unmute is a good thing.
And you learned.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer and Zafar, for being on this show today. It was an absolute pleasure to have both of you. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for sharing the last slide with all our audience. I'm sure there is wealth of information and wisdom and skills that you can pick up from once you visit the website and access these resources. So thank you very much once again, Jennifer, Zephyr, for being on this show. It was a pleasure having you with us, and it was a truly insightful session. Wish you all the best. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you so much, Rakesh. Thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you
for
so
being
much,
with us.
Rakesh. Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so that brings us to the end of today's segment. I hope you enjoyed the session. Um, I think there were lots of takeaways for all of us who are aspiring to be leaders, who are leaders, to learn from these mind traps. And you've got access to some resources that you should always go back to and look for more information that may help you. So, with that, I will pick up our two lucky winners for the day. So, we have Ranit. Ranit, congratulations. And the second winner is Mohit. Ranit and Mohit, please leave your email IDs in the comment box if you're still with us. And we will get back to you with an Amazon gift voucher. Thank you very much for those who asked all their questions, and hope you got the right answers or the answer that you were looking for. Just before we close the curtains, a big thank you for our community partners, Adgully, Paul Writer, Resulticks, and Shoolini University for being with us and staying with us and spreading the message through Master Speak. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best.